But then a couple of researchers recently looked at very heavy users, and there was this idea that a very heavy user might have residual THC blood levels at very low levels in their system even after they used. And a very important paper came out, and I want to highlight it because it's not published yet, but it was done by NIDA. I went to a conference of the American Academy of Forensic Scientists in January or February when they talked about this. They found in some heavy users, even 7 days after these people haven't used marijuana, they have residual levels of THC in their blood. Obviously, a per se level that judge somebody as having THC in their blood as being per se impaired would be very problematic for these heavy users. And this is something that is new. It's a new debate in this issue, but it's something very important for us to talk about.
Well, can you define heavy user as used in that experiment?
These were people that were smoking, they defined them as blunts, several blunts a day, every day, until they went into, these were mostly individuals living in a very urban area of Baltimore. Interestingly, and I'm not a scientist, so I don't know, but women were far more likely to test positive for THC after abstinence for longer periods of time than men, even though their use patterns weren't particularly different.
What's the name of that article?
Thank God I'm a guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it has not been published yet. It appeared in the Proceedings of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. It's called Plasma Cannabinoid Concentrations in Daily Cannabis Users During 7 Days of Monitored Abstinence. I should note that plasma isn't quite the same thing as whole blood. It's more sensitive than whole blood. Generally what it means is you take a whole blood sample, you remove the red blood cells, and it gives you a more sensitive indicator of what might be present in the blood. But just a quote from it, they say, "For the first time, we presented evidence of the presence of THC in plasma for multiple days during monitored abstinence, suggesting that detection in plasma may not indicate recent use in individuals consuming cannabis on a daily basis." That is important to note because I guarantee the police and the prosecution will in fact say that if you identified THC in someone's blood, they must have just been smoking, and if they identified it in a, God forbid, a crash case, they're going to say that driver was smoking while they were driving, and this is evidence that may not have been the case at all, particularly if they were a regular user or if they were a medical patient who's using every day. Real quick, I want to talk about a couple other things, a couple more big words. 11-hydroxy-THC, this is a metabolite of marijuana, but it's a very highly psychoactive one. Generally, when a person smokes marijuana, 11-hydroxy-THC is produced in very nominal levels. When a person ingests marijuana, they take Marinol, they eat marijuana in a brownie. The THC is actually then metabolized by the liver. It is turned into 11-hydroxy-THC. It's 11-hydroxy-THC that enters the bloodstream, eventually enters the brain. That's why there's a delayed onset and a high, and that's why a person feels really, really high sometimes, because 11-hydroxy-THC tends to be far more potent than THC. It can be measured in the blood, often isn't measured by labs in these DUI cases. Sometimes it is, but it has also, like THC, a fairly short half-life. The other metabolite you're probably far more familiar with is carboxy-THC. That is the inactive metabolite. It is not psychoactive. It is not linked to impairment, and that can be detected in the blood for short periods of time, but it can be detected in the urine for quite long periods of time if a person is a regular user of marijuana. Go back to that DOT report that I cited earlier. Cannabis effects on driving dissipate quickly after 1 hour. So here we have science has the ability to detect THC for 7 days, but we have the Department of Transportation saying that really we only want to be able to detect THC for 1 hour because that might indicate if our person was actually driving under the influence or not. No THC-related effects were measurable in driving performance 24 hours after smoking. This was a brand new study that came out I'm going to talk about a little later. Carboxy-THC, as I said, the metabolite they're typically looking for in urine, detectable for days or weeks after past use. Nobody, except for DAs and police, will tell you with a straight face that the detection of carboxy-THC is indicative of recently using the drug or impairment. Department of Justice doesn't even say so. Positive test for a drug metabolite does not indicate recency, frequency, or amount of use or impairment. Individuals who study marijuana's effects on driving don't say so. Past use of cannabis is determined by the presence of carboxy-THC in drivers, does not increase crash risk. End of story. A very good study by Mono and colleagues, quantitation of carboxy-THC can neither accurately predict the time of last cannabis use, nor suggest any relationship between urine drug concentrations and psychomotor performance. You've got to be familiar with this. I was just involved in a case in Florida about 2 weeks ago. The prosecution was swearing up and down that with a positive carboxy-THC in urine of 12 nanograms, they could tell you the hour this person smoked marijuana and they're obviously impaired. Well, nobody else thinks so, but the police thought so. And then real quick, one other aside. Do people here understand the difference between an immunoassay test for drugs and a gas chromatography mass spectrometer test for drugs? One's known as a preliminary screen, one's known as a confirmation test. It's really, really important to know the difference. The immunoassay test does not look for drugs. It doesn't have the ability to do that. It is a test that looks whether the presence of a metabolite might be in the urine. It does that by administering a protein that they call an antibody and seeing if it gets a reaction with a particular substance or a substance that might resemble the substance they're looking for. If they get that reaction, they tag the sample. They then take the tagged sample and they mix it with yet another protein, another antibody. If they get a particular reaction, then they assume that there's a likelihood that a certain drug may be present. But there's a lot of assumptions going on. There's a lot of resembling going on. It's why 75% of immunoassay tests for amphetamines end up being false positives. 75%. Because the antibody reacted with a drug that resembled what they were looking for, but not exactly what they were looking for. A GCMS test actually separates the antigen from the antibody, quantifies it, measures it, and identifies it. So when you're dealing with these cases, it is always important, if the DA says they've got a positive drug test, first you have to define what that means. Does it have a positive reaction for a certain metabolite, or does it actually have the drug? And you have to decide if the test has been confirmed or not. I like to explain the difference between the two tests as if, you go out to a bar, and if you're a guy, you've been having a few drinks and you see a pretty woman. If you're a girl, you're having a few drinks. You see a guy, might be a handsome guy, you pick him up, you take him home, and then the next morning you get the confirmation test, and you find out if you have a true positive or a false positive. Either that person really resembled the person you thought they were the night before, or that morning they really are the person you thought they were the night before. That's the difference between an EMIT test and a confirmation test. And I've learned recently, living in California, that in some states, they never do confirmation testing. The city of San Francisco legally is prohibited from doing confirmation testing. So when you have a positive test result for drugs, if you will, in San Francisco, you actually don't.